he could have been this, shadow liberal insider that was indirectly benefiting from the SHTC. Like, whether it is or it isn't really the issue. The point is, we don't know.
This is exactly the problem.
Is Mark Carney already demonstrating himself to be the least transparent prime minister in the history of our country? It certainly seems that way, but we wanted to get the opinion of the conservative ethics critic, Michael Barrett.
Let's take a look. Michael Barrett, welcome back to Northern Perspective. It's great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to chat with you.
All right, so let's just get right into this. It has been a very interesting 7 days. We know an election is going to be called on Sunday, but there are still a lot of questions about the Prime Minister, Mr. Mark Carney, and his mysterious assets. We know they're in Brookfield. We don't know what they are. And he seems to be very annoyed when being asked about them. So you've been digging into this and putting out some updates. What can you tell us?
Right now, we have the least transparent prime minister in history with Mark Carney. So every public office holder, as some public office holders are not elected, politicians are elected usually, and they have a disclosure to make. So Mark Carney has hung everything on this idea that because he's got 60 days after he was sworn in as prime minister to make a disclosure that everything is fine. Well, a couple of things with that to start off. First of all, just simply checking the box and saying that I've met the minimum standard is beneath what Canadians should expect from their prime minister. That's the first thing. Second of all, making a disclosure doesn't mean that you've avoided any conflict of interest. It doesn't mean that you've given full transparency. And Canadians have seen before that Mark Carney will do two things. One, he'll lie. And a great example of his propensity to lie comes from another example of what is typical of Mark Carney's character. And that's him putting his own profits ahead of Canadians. So he was asked during the Liberal leadership, one of the few times he took questions during the Liberal leadership, if he had played a role in Brookfield moving their Canadian headquarters to the United States. And he said he had nothing to do with it. Well, that was a lie. And in fact, we received a copy. We acquired a copy of a letter that Mark Carney signed and sent to all of Brookfield shareholders 6 days after Donald Trump had threatened Canada with tariffs for the first time, urging all shareholders to do the best thing for their profits, for his profits, and to approve this headquarters move to the U.S. So here we have Mark Carney putting profits ahead of what's best for Canada, and we've got him lying about it. So now when he's the prime minister, he's supposed to be making these disclosures. He's got these investments in Brookfield that are going into a blind trust. Someone called it a Venetian blind trust because he can see, he knows what he put into it. And some of these things, they can't be changed. They're not like stocks or ETFs that most of us are familiar with, where the trustee for the fund would trade them away. These are things, investments that he set up for Brookfield that are going to keep paying him commissions into the future based on the decisions that he makes while he's prime minister, and on what kind of things, the kind of things Mark Carney likes to talk about most, which is green technology, just like he did with heat pumps when he had advised Justin Trudeau for Canada to go all in on heat pumps. And why did Mark Carney do that? Well, my goodness, didn't Brookfield have a big stake in heat pumps?
Well, and one of the things that we've talked about is because of his propensity to invest in green technology, one of the biggest questions that we have is, does Brookfield have any investments in these startup companies that would have received some of this green technology fund from SDTC? So is that potentially a reason why he doesn't want people to see what is in that until after the election? Because he could have been this, shadow liberal insider that was indirectly benefiting from the SHTC. Like whether it is or it isn't really the issue. The point is we don't know.
This is exactly the problem, is we don't know what we don't know about Mark Carney. And we called him conflict of interest Carney before, and now he's in the Prime Minister's office. He's the decider, and he's saying, well, I'm going to need a conflict of interest screen on any decisions that touch my investments. Well, Brookfield's got their fingers in all kinds of pies, whether it's infrastructure or energy or telecommunications or green technology, all things that the Prime Minister, of course, is going to have discussions about and take decisions on. And SDTC is a great example where we have this report from the Auditor General finds all of these conflicts of interest. The Ethics Commissioner, of course, finding the Liberal appointed chair to have broken those conflict of interest laws, like Justin Trudeau, like some of Mark Carney's cabinet ministers. And now we're supposed to wait until after an election to find out what these potential conflicts are, how conflicted the Prime Minister is, and then we're stuck with him for 4 years. That's not how it's supposed to work. And so this law was set up by Conservatives in 2006. And the plan was, after the 2006 election, the plan was to stop the kind of Liberal corruption that we saw under the last Liberal government. Look here, fast forward to after 9 years of a Liberal government, and we've got to change the rules again because we had no idea the lengths that Liberals would go to climb through loopholes and to put their friends and Liberal insiders ahead of what was best for Canadians.
So Canadians could be going to the polls and voting for a Liberal platform that, unbeknownst to them, makes the Prime Minister richer. Is that correct?
That's 100% right. We have absolutely no idea what his investments are, what his conflicts of interest are, and the things that he's proposing, even the announcements that he's been making in the few days since he was sworn in as Prime Minister. We have no idea what that does to his investments and to his assets. But do you know who does know? Mark Carney knows. And it's unacceptable. It's, of course, unethical, but it's also, it lacks the basic transparency. There's this decline in Canadians' confidence in elected officials and public institutions. Well, Exhibit A, Mark Carney.
Well, and there was some recent media on Mark Carney where he says, oh, well, for the conflict of interest that I do have, yes, we're going to set up this screen. And then I said, time out. This is a guy that when questioned about having conflicts of interest in the first place, asked Rosemary Barton of CBC to look inside herself because she was coming at him from a place of ill will when she said, are you saying you don't have conflicts of interest? I find that hard to believe. And he essentially attacked her for that. But then 2 days later, essentially admits, yes, I do have conflict of interest. So many that there's going to be, all of these, privacy screens all over the place. And the question is okay, so how many decisions are you going to actually be allowed to participate in at this point? Because it feels like these are going to be everywhere.
This is absolutely right. And he said on the Monday that he had no conflicts of interest in that press conference where he attacked those journalists who asked him the question. And then I don't even know if it was 24 hours later. And he said that he did have conflicts of interest and they would need to be managed. But let's be serious here. He says in one breath that he set up a robust conflict of interest management plan with the Ethics Commissioner and then says, but I have no conflicts. Well, how robust does a plan need to be if you've got no conflicts of interest? You can't believe a word this guy says. And that's why the other thing that really underscores the importance of the need for full disclosure, and that's what we're asking for. We haven't asked Mark Carney, we haven't condemned him for making money in the past, or haven't said anything except we want transparency. So let us see what those assets are, what your holdings are, and then let's compare those later against what he's disclosed to the Ethics Commissioner when that gets published, because you want to have the receipts when it comes to this guy, because you just can't take what he says at face value.
Well, and what just blows me away is the fact that this is such a unique scenario where Justin Trudeau resigns. You have a non-politician who's never run before and has not run yet, ends up becoming the leader of the Liberal Party, de facto prime minister. There's no way that in 2006 this scenario could have been foreseen in terms of
Right.
this disclosure bit. But that's where I think the unwritten rules and the spirit of those rules need to be followed. Which is, the whole point of this is so that Canadians know who they're voting for and what they're voting for. And the fact that he is essentially saying, well, we're just going to follow the rules to the T and rely on a technicality, which doesn't even serve the point of the rules in the first place, that just shows a level of dishonesty. And frankly, it's very concerning to us being on the outside, seeing all of these scandals and the way the Liberal Party has operated. This just seems like this guy is a more sophisticated Justin Trudeau, which is terrifying.
Yeah, and look at his record. Look at his record about what Mark Carney has prioritized. And we talked about the moving of the headquarters from Canada to the U.S. And the Liberals have famously said, and they've got their PR people to talk to the media, and they've got their PR department, the CBC, repeating this claim that, well, there was no jobs or no change in investment as a result of it. Well, look at Mark Carney's tenure on the board at Brookfield. Take a look at the investment that the assets by location, and this graphic says it very well. There was a 22.55% change, an increase to that asset allocation in the U.S. and a decline of almost 4% in Canada. Does this seem like a guy who's putting Canada first? You look at all of the countries, the winners and losers that Brookfield under Mark Carney picked, and that list is only showing one loser. He chose to reduce the investment in Canada. Why is that? Well, I think it can be answered by the same question as to why Mark Carney's never run for office before. He's never run to be a member of parliament. Why didn't he run in the 2019 election or the 2021 election? Why is that? For the same reason that he was undermining the investments in our country, undermining business growth in our country, consumer confidence, investor confidence, with the headquarters move. And now we see what it looks like with their actual filings and what they did with investment and with assets while Mark Carney was there. And this is not a guy who's putting Canada first. And the evidence is black and white. I know that there's so much, political static out there and everyone gets into their lanes. But the question that I often get asked is, well, Mark Carney's got all this business experience. How does that contrast against Pierre Poilievre? I'll tell you what, Pierre Poilievre has sent 0 jobs to the United States. He has directed no investment out of this country. But Mark Carney has a track record of doing just that, chasing jobs to the U.S. And when did he decide to make the biggest move, that headquarters move? Right after Donald Trump said that he wanted to repatriate investment and jobs to the United States. This guy is not in it for Canadians.
So with an election on the horizon, what do you think is the most important thing Canadians need to keep in mind about this whole situation?
Well, this is, I really think that it all ties back to what the Liberals have ignored for the last 9 years, and that's the ability of Canadians to prosper. And you hear Pierre talk about the Canadian dream, this Canadian promise that we make, and we make it. It was made to us when we were born, and we've sold that dream all around the world, and people have immigrated to this country for as long as Canada's been Canada, and before, for a dream of something better. And it's really starkly changed under the Liberals because they've turned their back on people who are just trying to have a nice life, to be able to afford a home in a safe community and to be able to work an honest job that helps build this country up. and to be able to retire and to be comfortable. But that's not what the Liberals have focused on. They've focused on insiders. How many times have we talked about, and how many I as I've said before, I watch the pod. How many times have you talked about all these Liberal scandals where they're helping out these Liberal insiders? It's never been about helping Main Street Canadians. And that's why food bank lineups are so long. That's why housing prices are out of control, because supply has been so restricted as a result of bureaucracies fueled by the Liberal government, and they broke our immigration system. We now have people coming to this country on that promise, that Canadian promise, and they're going home. They're leaving Canada and saying, you know what, I don't want to make this my home. We need the best and the brightest in the world to choose Canada. And so I think it really comes down to, in the face of the threats from the economic threats from the U.S., I think when you look at the geopolitical situation with China and Russia, and you look at the opportunities that have been squandered by the Carney Trudeau Liberals. The U.S. just inked a major deal to sell LNG to Japan. That was our deal. That was our deal that Justin Trudeau said there was no business case for. What would that have done for Canadian prosperity if we were exporting that LNG? And the same thing is true with oil and gas. The refusal, the Bill C-69, these consistent efforts by the Liberals to put down Canadian prosperity and the Canadian economy has had a trickle-down effect that's just really beat up Canadians and made them feel hopeless. And I think that the election is restoring that Canadian promise. And that's why I'm very optimistic. I'm very hopeful. I'm very excited for people to hear more from Pierre Poilievre in the coming weeks during this election period, because I really think that this is the defining issue, and not not what the Liberals would try and tell you with all of the distractions that they'll put in the window over the next couple of weeks to try and hide from their record of ethical lawbreaking, to be frank, and economic vandalism that they've perpetrated on this country that's going to be paid for by our kids and our grandkids.
And if the Conservatives are successful in forming government after this election, are there plans to further tighten these ethical restrictions and plug these loopholes that Carney is currently using?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll plug the Carney loophole. We'll make sure that anyone that runs in a leadership in the future is going to have this disclosure made, so that we can see whether or not the dealings that they're engaged in are ethical. We're going to continue with, we forced this Liberal government, after they ordered their buddies and Liberal insiders these massive contracts worth millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, totaling billions of dollars over the last 9 years. We forced, first of all, audits by the Auditor General, and second of all, we ordered the government to get that money back, to start clawing back these ill-gotten gains that these companies have received. And we're going to continue to pursue that money. When you talk about $20 billion in consulting in Ottawa, and you use a test case like the $60 million Arrive scam, and a third of the money was just grift, well, how else could we repurpose that money? So I love when people ask me about, it's different than your question, but they ask me about, well, Conservatives, they say they're going to fix the budget. It sounds like there's going to be cuts. Oh, there's going to be cuts. We're going to cut corruption. We're going to cut waste. And you can look at the $1 billion green slush fund, or the Arrive scam, or the out of control use in consulting that they've allowed to happen under their watch, that actually undermines the work of the public service. So we look forward to doing that. But there has to be accountability. There has to be accountability in contracting. There has to be accountability in government. And the last time we chatted, we talked about my private member's bill. I can tell you, Pierre's very familiar with it. He doesn't want to hear me talk about it anymore. I made that sales pitch, but you can expect that that there will be a dedicated piece on accountability in the platform that we're going to see in the next couple weeks. And that's and what I'd say, if anyone thinks that they take a look at it, and I haven't seen the finished product yet, it's on Pierre's desk, and they say, well, I wish they went farther here. Well, we're hoping to use that as the platform to build off of, right? These are the foundational pieces, and we're also going to have to make changes and root out corruption where we haven't even found it yet, because we're going to have to get in there and get into it and take a look and see. My goodness, I expect that if the slush fund and the arrive scam and the fake procurement processes where people pretending to be indigenous, and if all of these things are going on, and we were able to extract that through committees under a liberal government, imagine what we can do when we actually have the keys to the filing cabinet.
We don't need to spend more money to bring people in, because it looks like the people that have been digging into this over the last 4 years are the people that are qualified and equipped to find those efficiencies and to root out those wastes. Is that fair?
You look at the people that are on our team, and I'm always loath to name names because then you end up missing someone. But you have people like Stephanie Kuzi and Kelly McCauley and Garnet Jenis and Larry Brock and John Williamson and you have our Michael Cooper. You have the folks, Kelly Block, that make us see. I'm gonna.
And there's dozens and dozens more.
And there's so many people, whether it's on the ethics committee or the public accounts committee, or the government operations committee, and we've been doing that work, and it's part of our team's DNA. And this is the accountability that's expected. And we have tough conversations about what is acceptable in terms of what our commitments are to Canadians as well. And so when you look at the work that we've done at committee, that's what Canadians can expect. And it's the Liberals' least favorite thing when they see, any of those people I've mentioned, or, Damien Couric, or walk into a committee room and in the middle of January or in the middle of July when they didn't want to be there. And it's because we're routing out their corruption. And, before Pierre Poilievre was leader, it was Sunday afternoons that I'd be at a podium in Ottawa on Parliament Hill, standing next to Pierre Poilievre as we ripped into the waste and scandal on something like the $1 billion that the Liberals greenlit to spend on their We scandal with their fake Canada Student Service grant. So this is part of our DNA, and there won't be any surprises for Canadians that it's about accountable government. It's about responsible stewardship of the taxpayers' money and making sure that we're delivering excellent world-class services. This is all about Canada being the best at what we're doing. We need a Canada first approach to procurement. We need a Canada first approach to everything that we turn our eyes to, and the results will be shown with better delivery of services, and we'll see things like stronger Canadian forces as one example as a result of it. So we'll do that if we find that there is foreign aid, for example, going to dictatorships, or that's being wasted and abused. We'll take that money and we're going to reinvest it in Canada's brave men and women who put on the uniform to serve our country.
Well, and there's lots of insinuations by both the NDP and the Liberals about the fact that, the Conservatives are going to cut this, the Conservatives are going to cut that. But our point is always this. I don't think that even if there are going to be cuts to some of these programs, the Conservatives aren't even going to be in a position to even know if they're going to be cutting that, because you need to get the house in order first. And that's looking at all of the wasteful spending inside the government even before you get to these programs. So it's going to be, I know it's going to be a question that you're going to be getting for the entire campaign, that Pierre's going to be getting for the entire campaign. But what it comes down to is there's a lot of things like the housing accelerator, like the foreign aid and all of this stuff that you need to account for, and then know really how much you have to play with in these horrendous government purchasing processes that dramatically inflate the cost of literally every project that goes on in the government. So once you have a handle on that, I think then it's going to be a conversation of, okay, well, now what do we have to work with, and what's our baseline? So it's going to be very interesting to see that process play out. And I think Canadians are ready. We're ready for change. Canadians have been waiting for 10 years. And as we tell them, if everybody works hard, we're going to get that change at the end of April.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the message that I have for Canadians, the same message that I have for the folks who live right here in my community. And it's the same advice that you need to follow in any of our provinces or territories. If you are tired of the status quo after the last 9 years, if you're tired of the corruption, or you're tired of just scraping to get by, is that now is the time to stand up and to contribute to a local conservative campaign by volunteering, by you can knock on doors or put in signs or make phone calls. But the most important thing is to talk to your friends, talk to your family, tell them that on election day, you're going to order pizza to your house after everybody goes and votes, and then you can go and watch the results come in together for a national majority government for the Conservatives. But it's only going to come if people vote. And so polls go up, polls go down. The most important thing that people can do is just be steadfast in their commitment for a desire for change, and that's to vote. That's to vote in the next election. I wanted to look quickly. I'm sure we're running out of time, to make sure I didn't leave anybody off my list, though. I feel bad because I work with 118 outstanding Conservative MPs, and I know I left John Nader off my list when I was talking about members of public accounts. And it's just been a great experience in this last Parliament to be able to do the work that we've done. And I think that I'm not sure that I mentioned Frank Caputo and John Broussard, who did great work with us on the ethics committee as well. So it's so important to just recognize that we have this group of patriotic Canadians that really just want to do what's best for Canada, and like Pierre says, to just put Canada first and end the days of insiders getting ahead while everyday Canadians struggle.
Let's bring it home.
Let's bring it home.